I work in student records at Varanthy Universal Academy, which means I spend most of my time staring at data terminals and wishing I'd chosen literally any other career path. My job involves processing forms that no one reads, fixing errors that no one cares about, and attending meetings that could have been messages. Today started like every other day, which is to say, it started badly and got worse. The morning was quiet in the records archive. Rows of terminals hummed softly in the dim lighting, casting blue-grey shadows across my cluttered desk. I'd managed to go almost 3 hours without anyone bothering me, which is practically a record in this place. My 2 diagonal silver eyes were half-lidded as I processed enrollment verifications. And I was seriously considering whether anyone would notice if I just left and never came back. Then my terminal chimed with a priority summons from Dean Elindra Vela. Priority summons are never good. They mean someone important wants something complicated, and they want it immediately, and they expect me to care about it with the same urgency they do. I don't. I've never cared about anything with urgency in my entire life, and I'm not about to start now. I stood slowly, letting my elegant grey robe settle around me with its asymmetrical shoulders and layered panels. The geometric alien motifs embossed along the upper torso caught the terminal light as I shuffled toward the door. My integrated boots made soft sounds against the archive floor. If I walked slowly enough, maybe whatever crisis this was would resolve itself before I arrived. It didn't. The walk to the administrative wing took longer than necessary because I stopped twice to stare at walls and consider my life choices. When I finally reached Dean Vela's office, I could hear voices inside. Multiple voices. One of them belonged to Professor Vrel Thax from the Ancient Languages Department, which meant this was going to be exhausting. I palmed the entry panel and the door slid open. The dean's office was exactly as minimalist and intimidating as always. Angular furniture, arranged with geometric precision, a large window overlooking the campus where students moved between buildings like colorful insects. Dean Elindra Vela sat behind her desk, 3 liquid gold eyes fixed on something in her hands. Her pearl ivory skin seemed to glow in the natural light streaming through the window, and her long bioluminescent hair cascaded down past her shoulders, catching the light in ways that probably meant she was annoyed. Her sculptural ceremonial robe with its layered translucent panels and geometric cutouts made her look like she was about to pass judgment on someone's entire existence. Standing beside her desk was Professor Vrel Thax, the Octherian Ancient Languages professor who had never met a pun he didn't immediately fall in love with. His powder blue skin looked especially bright against his rumpled charcoal suit jacket, which had visible ink stains on both sleeves. His bulbous dome-shaped head housed 5 small black eyes scattered across his forehead, and right now all of them were blinking out of sync in what I recognized as extreme excitement. The 2 small sensory nodes on his temples were pulsing rapidly. His long, delicate fingers kept gesturing at something on the dean's desk. Sitting in a chair facing them both was a human. The human looked exactly as uncomfortable as anyone would look when summoned to the dean's office. He was young, probably early 20s by human standards, wearing a black hoodie and casual jeans that marked him clearly as a student. His dark hair was messy, in that way humans have, where you can't tell if it's intentional or if they just woke up. His expression was somewhere between confused and resigned, like he'd been pulled out of class for something he definitely didn't do, but nobody would believe him about anyway. "Coordinator liar," the dean said without looking up. "Thank you for coming. I hadn't come quickly, but she didn't mention that. I need you to verify a records issue," she continued, finally raising her 3 gold eyes to meet my gaze. "According to Professor Vrel Thax, we have a situation." Of course we did. We always had a situation. Situations were the only constant in academic administration. Professor Vrel Thax's sensory nodes pulsed brighter. "Corveth, thank goodness you're here. We have discovered something absolutely unprecedented. This human student, he gestured dramatically at the young man in the chair, nearly knocking over a decorative crystal on the dean's desk, has been writing in an extinct language. I stared at him. My diagonal silver eyes probably looked even more bored than usual. "Okay," I said. "Okay?" Vrelthax's 5 eyes widened in sequence. "Okay? This is monumental. He's been writing in ancient Terran script, a language that died out centuries ago according to the Galactic Linguistic Archives." He held up a notebook, an actual physical notebook made of paper, which was already unusual, and opened it to show pages covered in flowing handwritten text. The letters curved and connected in ways that looked organic, almost artistic. "This is English," Vrelthax said reverently, his long fingers tracing the air above the writing without touching it. "Extinct English. And he's been using it to take notes in my quantum sociology lecture." The human eye glanced at my wrist terminal to pull up his file. Emanuel. That was his name, shifted in his chair. "It's not extinct," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who had already explained this multiple times and wasn't being heard. "Earth still uses English. Billions of people speak it." "Impossible," Vrelthax said immediately, his sensory nodes pulsing in what he probably thought was an authoritative manner. "The archives clearly mark Terran English as extinct. The last recorded native speaker died centuries ago during the Great Linguistic Consolidation period." "The archives are wrong," Emanuel said flatly. This was the part where I was supposed to get involved, apparently. Dean Vela's 3 gold eyes shifted to me with the kind of look that meant she expected me to do my job. I suppressed what would have been a very deep sigh if I'd had the energy for it. I pulled up the Galactic Linguistic Archives on my wrist terminal, navigating through the database with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this exact search thousands of times for thousands of different reasons, none of which had ever mattered. The search results populated quickly. Terran language family, subset English. I read aloud in a monotone. Status, extinct. Last updated. I paused, squinting at the timestamp. Last updated about 8 centuries ago. "See?" Vrelthax said triumphantly. 8 centuries. This is extraordinary. We have a human who somehow learned a dead language and is using it casually. Do you know what this means for xenolinguistic research? "It means someone didn't update the database," I said. The room went quiet. Vrelthax's 5 eyes all focused on me at once, which was unsettling. "What?" "Someone didn't update the database," I repeated slowly, "because apparently we were doing this. English isn't extinct. Earth still uses it. The archives are wrong because nobody bothered to update them when Earth joined the Galactic Academic Network." Emanuel leaned forward slightly. "Thank you. I've been trying to explain, but the archives are never wrong." Vrelthax interrupted, his sensory nodes flickering with confusion. "They're maintained by the Central Linguistic Council. They have protocols, verification systems. They have bureaucracy," I corrected, "and bureaucracy has errors. This is an error." Dean Vela set the notebook down on her desk with careful precision. Her bioluminescent hair seemed to glow slightly brighter, which usually meant she was processing something she didn't like. "Coordinator Leah, are you saying that the Galactic Linguistic Archives have incorrectly classified a living language as extinct for 8 centuries? "Yes. And no one noticed?" "Apparently not. How is that possible?" I shrugged, which required more effort than it should have. My robe's layered panels shifted with the movement. Earth was a late addition to the network. Probably someone filed the initial linguistic survey wrong, marked English as extinct instead of active, and it's been sitting in the database ever since. These things happen. "These things happen?" Vrelthax's voice went up an octave. His 5 eyes blinked rapidly out of sync. "These things happen? We're talking about an entire language, a language with billions of speakers that we've classified as dead. So fix it," I said. The Dean's 3 gold eyes narrowed slightly. What would fixing it require? This was the part I really didn't want to explain, because explaining it meant acknowledging how much work it would be, which meant someone would expect me to do that work. Which meant my quiet afternoon of processing forms was completely destroyed. Form Theta Linguistic Revision, I said eventually. Submitted to the Central Linguistic Council for review. They verify with the Planetary Linguistic Authority, in this case, Earth's Educational Administration. Then it goes to the Archive Update Committee for approval. Then to the Database Maintenance Division for implementation. Then back to the Council for confirmation. Then, how many departments? Dean Vailer asked. 6. Timeline? Months, I said. Maybe longer, depending on how quickly each department processes the paperwork and whether they decide they need additional verification, which they will, because they always do. Emanuel made a sound that might have been a groan. Months? Professor Vrelthax's sensory nodes were pulsing irregularly now, like they couldn't decide whether to be excited or distressed. But this is fascinating. A language that died but didn't die. It's like linguistic resurrection. This is. His 5 eyes lit up simultaneously. This is a real grave situation, because the language was dead. In a grave. But now it's not. No one laughed. Get it? Vrelthax continued hopefully. Grave situation? Because, we understand the joke, Professor, Dean Vailer said in the tone of someone who very much did not find it funny. I was already calculating how long I could stretch the paperwork process to avoid actually doing any real work. If I submitted the forms slowly enough, routed them through every possible verification channel, maybe added a few lost-in-transit delays. There's an easier solution, I heard myself say, immediately regretting it. All 3 of them looked at me. Emanuel with hope, the Dean with expectation, Vrelthax with those 5 unblinking eyes that made my skin want to crawl. Just mark him as a temporal anomaly in the student database, I said. Special designation, problem solved. Dean Vailer's luminescent hair seemed to dim slightly. Coordinator liar. We cannot simply designate a student as an anomaly to avoid updating incorrect archival records. Why not? Because it violates academic protocol. The archives are incorrect. They must be corrected. Correcting them will take months. Then it will take months. This was exactly why I hated priority summons. They always led to more work. Always. I could feel my will to exist, slowly, draining out through my integrated boots. In the meantime, the Dean continued, her 3 gold eyes fixing on Emanuel, we have a protocol issue. You are currently writing in a language that is officially classified as extinct. This technically violates temporal linguistic preservation guidelines. Emanuel's expression shifted from hopeful to horrified. Wait, what? The guidelines state that extinct languages may only be used in controlled research environments to prevent archaeological contamination. Dean Vailer explained, with the calm precision of someone reciting regulations from memory. Using an extinct language for casual academic purposes is prohibited. But it's not extinct. According to the official records, it is. But you just said the records are wrong. They are wrong. But they are officially wrong, which means until they are officially corrected, they are officially correct. I watched Emanuel's face cycle through several emotions, landing somewhere between disbelief and despair. I sympathized. Galactic bureaucracy had that effect on people. Professor Vrelthax's sensory nodes were pulsing rapidly again. Dean Vailer, surely we can make an exception. This is an unprecedented linguistic discovery. Having a living speaker of a dead language on campus, this could revolutionize our understanding of language preservation. We should be studying him, not prohibiting him. Studying him? Emanuel repeated. Well, not studying you specifically, Vrelthax backtracked quickly. Studying the language. Through you, you'd be like a living fossil. In a good way. That's not better, I said. Right, sorry. Vrelthax's 5 eyes looked genuinely apologetic. I just mean this is exciting. It's like finding a dinosaur that's still alive, not that you're old. The language is old, metaphorically alive. You know what? I'm going to stop talking now. Appreciated, Emanuel muttered. Dean Vela picked up the notebook again, her long fingers with their subtle glow tracing the edge of the cover. Until the archival records are corrected, I'm afraid I must confiscate this. You are prohibited from writing in English for academic purposes. Emanuel stood up quickly. How am I supposed to take notes? You'll need to find alternative methods. Alternative methods? Like what? That, the dean said calmly, is not my concern. My concern is maintaining protocol compliance. Vrelthax leaned forward eagerly. Actually, this is incredible when you think about it. You're caught between two times, the past and present. You could say you're in quite the tense situation, because verb tenses, grammar, get it. I had never wanted to leave a room more in my entire life, Professor, Dean Vela said quietly, and Vrelthax's sensory nodes immediately stopped pulsing. She stood, her ceremonial robe flowing around her with its geometric patterns catching the light. She was tall, taller than all of us, and when she held the notebook, it looked like she was confiscating someone's entire future. Coordinator Laya will begin the archival correction process immediately, she said, and I felt my afternoon plans dying in real time. Professor Vrelthax, please prepare a report on the linguistic implications for the Academic Council. Emanuel, you are dismissed. Attend your classes, but refrain from any written work in English until this matter is resolved. Emanuel looked at me with desperation. How long will the correction take? I met his gaze with my diagonal silver eyes and delivered the truth as flatly as possible. Months, maybe longer. His expression crumbled. Vrelthax's 5 eyes were still gleaming with academic excitement. Don't worry, this is going to be wonderful for linguistic research. You're making history, or unmaking history, because the history says the language is dead, but it's not, so you're making new history by proving old history wrong. This is so. Professor, the dean said again. We all filed out of her office in silence. Well, silence, except for Vrelthax muttering about extinct languages and temporal paradoxes, and something about how this was all very comical, which I assumed was another failed pun about commas. I walked back to the records archive slowly, my boots making soft sounds against the polished floors. Students passed by in clusters, talking and laughing, completely unaware that somewhere in the galactic bureaucracy, a language spoken by billions had been dead for 8 centuries and no one had noticed. I reached my desk and stared at the terminal. Form Theta Linguistic Revision sat in my queue, waiting to be started. I looked at it for a long moment, then minimized the window and went back to processing enrollment verifications. The form could wait until tomorrow. Everything could always wait until tomorrow. The next few days were, predictably, a disaster. I say predictably because nothing in academic administration ever resolves smoothly. You'd think, after working here for as long as I have, I'd stop expecting things to improve. But occasionally some naive part of my brain still holds out hope. That part is always wrong. Emanuel became campus famous overnight, which is exactly the kind of attention no student actually wants. I saw him in the university courtyard the morning after the dean's office incident, sitting on a bench with no notebook, no writing materials, just staring at his hands like they'd personally betrayed him. A small crowd of linguistic students had formed a respectful distance away, whispering and pointing like he was a museum exhibit that might run away if they got too close. Professor Vrelthax was there too, of course, hovering near Emanuel with all 5 eyes blinking enthusiastically. I couldn't hear what he was saying from where I stood near the archive entrance, but I saw Emanuel's shoulders slump further with each passing moment, which told me everything I needed to know about how that conversation was going. I went back inside, not my problem, except it kept becoming my problem. The Form Theta Linguistic Revision sat in my queue like a personal insult. I'd started it barely entering the basic header information and request type before my motivation ran out entirely. Each section required documentation, verification codes, supporting evidence, cross-references to at least a dozen other database entries. The whole thing was designed by people who clearly had never done real work in their lives and wanted to make sure no one else could either. I submitted the initial request to the Central Linguistic Council on the second day, mostly because Dean Vailer's assistant had sent me 3 increasingly pointed messages about timeline expectations. The Council's automated response estimated a review period of 6 to 8 weeks before they'd even look at it. Emanuel was going to fail all his classes by then. Again, not technically my problem. I saw him in the hallways between archive shifts, always surrounded by curious students, asking him to say something in the ancient tongue, or professors requesting his presence at departmental seminars. He looked progressively more exhausted each time, his black hoodie becoming his permanent uniform, his expression settling into resigned frustration. Professor Vrelthax had apparently decided to follow Emanuel to every single one of his classes. I heard about this from another administrator who shared my break schedule, a chronically cheerful individual I actively avoided. She told me Vrelthax was treating Emanuel like a living linguistic treasure and had started documenting every English word the human spoke, building what he called a resurrection dictionary. "Isn't it fascinating?" she'd said. "No," I'd replied and walked away, but the situation kept escalating in ways that required my involuntary attention. Emanuel tried to work around the prohibition by recording himself speaking notes aloud in English on his personal device. Clever, technically not writing, perfectly reasonable solution. Except the university's translation matrix, the system that processed and archived all student audio for accessibility purposes, flagged his recordings as unidentified ancient linguistic fragments and quarantined them as potential archaeological data. The dean called me to her office again to discuss this. "He's found a loophole," Elindra said, her 3 gold eyes reviewing the flagged recordings on her terminal. Her bioluminescent hair was particularly bright that afternoon, which meant she'd been dealing with bureaucratic headaches all morning. Spoken recordings of extinct languages fall under the same preservation protocols as written materials. "So let him record," I said from my position near the door, where I'd remained standing in hopes this meeting would be short. I cannot allow protocol violations simply because they're inconvenient to enforce. He needs to study somehow. He can study in galactic standard like every other student. His brain doesn't work in galactic standard. He thinks in English. Her 3 eyes shifted to me with the kind of look that meant I'd said something dangerously close to having an opinion. I regretted it immediately. "Do you have an alternative solution, Coordinator Liar?" I absolutely did not want to have an alternative solution. Having solutions meant people expected you to implement them. But my mouth kept talking anyway, probably out of spite toward my own better judgment. "Personal dialect designation," I said. "Classify his English as a unique individual dialect of galactic standard instead of a separate language. Bypasses the extinct language protocols entirely. 1 form. Takes maybe a day to process." The silence that followed felt heavy. Elindra's luminescent hair dimmed slightly as she processed this. "You're suggesting we circumvent 8 centuries of archival classification by simply reclassifying the language?" "Yes, that seems ethically questionable. So is failing a student because of a database error no one bothered to fix." Her 3 gold eyes studied me for a long moment. I maintained my usual expression of maximum apathy, which wasn't difficult because it was genuine. "Prepare the paperwork," she finally said. "I'll review it." I left before she could add more tasks to my workload. The personal dialect designation form was mercifully short, only 3 sections. Minimal verification requirements, processed through the student record system instead of the Galactic Linguistic Council. I could have it completed in an hour if I actually cared about doing it quickly. I did it in 2 days, because I never did anything quickly. But eventually it was done, submitted, and approved by the Dean's office with what I suspected was reluctant pragmatism on Elindra's part. The system updated Emanuel's linguistic profile automatically. Terran personal dialect, derived from galactic standard, authorized for all academic purposes. Problem solved. I sent a message to Emanuel's student account, informing him his notebook would be returned and all prohibitions lifted. I didn't expect a response and didn't get one, which was fine. And acknowledgement was overrated anyway. What I did get was Professor Vrelthax appearing in the records archive the next morning, all 5 eyes wide with distress. "Corvith!" He burst through the door with more energy than anyone should have before midday. His sensory nodes were pulsing erratically, and his rumpled suit jacket looked like he'd slept in it. "I heard about the dialect designation. You can't be serious." I stared at my terminal, not looking up, completely serious. "But this was..." His long, delicate fingers gestured wildly, nearly knocking over a stack of physical files on the corner of my desk. This was the linguistic discovery of my career. A living speaker of an extinct language. And now it's just a dialect? A personal quirk? Yes, that's not fair. Fair would be the archives being correct in the first place. His 5 eyes blinked in rapid sequence, processing this. But the research potential, the academic papers, I was going to present at the Interstellar Linguistics Conference. Resurrection of ancient Terran English, it was going to be revolutionary. Write about database errors instead, I suggested without emotion. Equally revolutionary, probably more useful. Vrelthax's sensory nodes pulsed with what looked like genuine despair. He deflated slightly, his shoulders slumping beneath his ink-stained jacket. I suppose it's for the best. The student was clearly distressed by all the attention, and he does need to study. And the language isn't actually dead, so calling it dead was technically incorrect. And academic integrity demands accuracy, even when accuracy is less exciting than... Yes, I interrupted, hoping to end this conversation before it gained momentum. He sighed, which sounded strange coming from an Octharian, more like air escaping through his sensory nodes than actual vocalization. "Well, I suppose I can write about bureaucratic linguistic classification errors, not as exciting, but perhaps more practical. Though I still think you're missing the bigger picture here. This was about preservation of..." "Professor," I said quietly, meeting his 5-eyed gaze with my 2 diagonal ones. "The language was never dead, it was just paperwork." He stared at me for a moment, sensory nodes flickering uncertainly, then nodded slowly. "Right, just paperwork. Not everything is a grand discovery. Sometimes things are just administrative errors." "Exactly." He left, looking considerably less enthusiastic than when he'd arrived, which I counted as a personal victory. I saw Emanuel one more time after that, crossing the courtyard with his return notebook tucked under his arm. He was writing something as he walked, pen moving across paper in those flowing connected letters that had caused so much unnecessary drama. A few linguistic students still watched him with interest, but the crowd had dispersed. He was just another student again, taking notes in his own language, which technically had never stopped being alive. The Galactic Linguistic Archive still listed English as extinct. I'd filed the correction request, but it was sitting in a queue somewhere in the Central Council system, probably destined to remain there for months or years until someone with more motivation than me decided it mattered enough to process. It didn't really matter, though. The archive said the language was dead. The student proved it wasn't. In the end, reality won over documentation, which was how it should be. The human had been caught writing in an ancient dead language that turned out to have never died at all. It had just been buried under centuries of paperwork that no one had bothered to correct. Bureaucracy had killed it on paper. The student had resurrected it by simply existing, and I'd filed the forms that let everyone stop caring about the difference. I returned to my desk in the records archive, minimized the still pending form, Theta Linguistic Revision, and went back to processing enrollment verifications. Somewhere in the vast administrative machinery of galactic academia, English remained officially extinct. Somewhere on Earth, Billions of people kept speaking it anyway, completely unaware they'd been dead for 8 centuries. And in the archive, surrounded by humming terminals and the soft blue glow of data systems, I continued not caring about any of it with the same dedication I brought to everything else in my life. The language hadn't died. It had just been filed incorrectly. And now a human student could write his notes in peace, which was probably all that had mattered from the beginning.